Okay, we're going to try the second passage again. So the second passage is Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. This is the passage you have like 8 questions, most of you. Some of you are cut down to 4. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. But there are the reading guide questions that are here on this column. Make sure you're looking at those reading guide questions. You have 3 of those. And you have, of course, your 4 multiple choice. Okay? So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You have 9 total questions. You get 2 points for turning them in. You get 2 points for each question. 9 times 2 is 18, plus 2 is 20. That's how you get your 20 points. Okay. Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. In 1951, Richard Nixon was a United States Senator from California. The next year, at the age of just 39, Nixon was chosen to run for vice president on Dwight D. Eisenhower's ticket. Eisenhower won the 1952 presidential election, and Nixon became a national figure. During his 8-year term as vice president, Nixon assumed the power of the presidency 3 times when Eisenhower was ill. Once in 1955, once in 1956, and once in 1957. John F. Kennedy challenged Richard Nixon for the presidency in 1960. Kennedy was a United States Senator who had less experience than Nixon. Early in 1960, Nixon was favored to win. However, Nixon did not have Kennedy's personality. Many Americans approved of Kennedy because of his youth and his good looks. As the campaign wore on, Kennedy's popularity soared. Kennedy eventually beat Nixon in one of the closest elections in American history in November of 1960. Kennedy's presidency began in January 1961. After being sworn in, Kennedy gave a famous speech from the steps of the United States Capitol. Kennedy said to his fellow Americans, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Sadly, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November 1963. 5 years later, in the presidential election of 1968, Richard Nixon defeated Hubert Humphrey and became president. Nixon's time in the White House, however, ended in disgrace when he resigned in 1974. Okay, I did not do reading guide questions as I went. I should have. So the first question for the reading guide question said, where does a sentence describing where and when Richard Nixon was born belong in the passage? So if you're going to go to a basic history, those kinds of things all begin or belong in which paragraph? Paragraph 1, definitely. You're introducing. Good. So those things are appropriately written. Number 2, would a description of the debates between Nixon and Kennedy during the campaign belong before or after the last sentence of paragraph 2? Okay, so you have to go to the last sentence of paragraph 2, which is down here, which said Kennedy eventually beat Nixon in one of the closest elections in American history in November of 1960. This is Tim talking about him winning the election. The debates come before or after the election? Before. So it would go right before that last sentence of paragraph 2. So before the last sentence of paragraph 2 would be great. Or you could just put before. And then the last one, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I usually hear it as, was a major event during Kennedy's presidency. It occurred in 1962. Does a description of the crisis belong at the start or the end of paragraph 3, and why? So again, if you're doing sequence of events, paragraph 3 starts out with Kennedy's presidency began in January 1961. Okay, so if it began 1961 and this is talking about 62, you probably should do it right here at the end of paragraph 3. Okay, just sequence of events, time order is your reason. Okay, all right, let's look at the questions. Number 1, it is clear this passage is written in sequential order because events are described in the order they happen historically. Each figure's life is covered individually without any overlap. Well, there's not 2 that are like that, so no. Richard Nixon was vice president before John F. Kennedy. Yes, but no. Or D, the most recent events are described in the passage. So make sure you're answering the question on this one. This one may trip some people up, and it did. It says, it is clear that this passage is written in sequential order because. So events are described in the order they happen historically. That would be sequential order, because the opposite of a sequential order would be D. D is the opposite. The most recent events are described first in the passage. That would be reverse order. Okay, so make sure you actually look sequential, meaning the order they happened in history. Okay? All right, 2. John F. Kennedy was a war hero during the World War II, which Americans fought from 1941 to 1945. To maintain sequential order, the author would include a description of Kennedy's heroics, and you've got to see where this date fits in. So you're looking for dates, 41 to 45. So the first is after paragraph 4. So paragraph 4 is after 1974, so we know that's not right, okay? Between paragraphs 2 and 3, okay, you're looking at 2, 1960, and then you're going to 61. Yeah, that won't work because we're in the 60s. We're looking for 1941 and 1945, okay? Between paragraphs 1 and 2, okay? Paragraph 1 is 1956 and 57 already. So that's not even true. So the only one that makes sense is before paragraph 1, because it starts out in 1951. Okay, guys, the war was back in 41 to 45. So sequential order, sequence of events, dates, and order, okay? So the first two were A and D, to double check, okay? 3, why is Nixon's presidency described after Kennedy's presidency? Okay, so look and see, why is that? This Nixon's presidency ended in disgrace. That has nothing to do with why they're in that order. Kennedy's presidency ended tragically. That still doesn't tell about order. Nixon's presidency was after Kennedy's presidency. Or Kennedy's presidency was after Nixon's presidency. So if you've read them in order, Kennedy was president, and then when Kennedy was assassinated, that's when Nixon took over. So Nixon's presidency was after Kennedy's. Okay? All right, the last one, number 4. Information about the death of Richard Nixon belongs either at the beginning of the passage, no. With the information of Kennedy's death, probably not. In between paragraphs 1 and 2, 1 and 2 go from 1957 to 60. He's not president yet, and it's talking about his death. At the end of the passage is the only logical explanation, because it goes with him resigning in 74. Bless you, sweetie. Oh, bless you. And then, obviously, that time order, the death is after he resigned. Again, sequential order. So if you have any questions on these, please let me know. If you're doing this on paper, I didn't do one thing. If you're doing it on paper, you can literally write in the answers here, okay? And I did not. I'll go back and do that. I have Sissy's hair in my face. So you write them in if it's on paper. If it's on the actual document, you can type it in on Cami, or you can just put it on your document, your Google Doc, okay? So I'll just get her face in here because she does not want to wear clothes today. Say hi. Are you feeling better? Okay, I guess not. Well, thank you. Let me know if you have any more questions, and I'm sorry it's a little different today, but let me know if you have any questions, and have fun doing your work. And if you need help, make sure you ask.